Welcome everyone, they call me Tech and I've really been enjoying Dreams for the last month, so I wanted to talk about it. After not getting into the beta, I admit I got kinda annoyed with the whole scene around Dreams, so I just started ignoring the game until something interesting would happen. And well, something interesting did happen because the game is now more or less released. After 4 to 5 years of waiting for this, I must say that it's unbelievable that the Dreams icon is right there on my PlayStation home screen. But enough of that. So, because I didn't get into the beta, I had to learn Dreams from scratch like 4 weeks ago. This means I'm pretty much on the same skill level as everyone else who bought into the early access. Still, because Dreams is so incredibly diverse in the amount of things possible, I wanted to talk about some of the stuff I learned during the last month, specifically some lighting tricks. If you have also some tips and tricks to share yourself, there's this new awesome system on YouTube called the comment section. I don't know if you can find it beside the video or above it or something, but apparently it's a great way to interact with people. But let's get into it. So, if you didn't know, and I'm almost sure you didn't, I recreated the apartment from the Cyberpunk 2077 gameplay demo. You can find this level in Dreams. In this video I want to show you what kind of lighting techniques I used in it, which might give you an idea of how to use it in your own scenes. The main reason, by the way, why I want to first recreate other works before making things after my own imagination is because I really want to get a grasp of the limitations of the Dreams engine. This is harder to achieve when you give yourself the permission to give up on certain things. To be less vague, I would maybe compare it to like doing push-ups and challenging yourself to do as many as possible before you can't go any further. Maybe you do 27 push-ups in a row and feel great about yourself, and then you move on. But what if you had set the specific goal to do 40 push-ups in a row? Suddenly giving up is a defeat instead of a victory, which might inspire you to keep trying until you can do those 40 push-ups. The same with Dreams. If I wanted to create a scene with a candlelight in it, but creating the candle gave me a lot of problems, I would maybe just scrap the whole idea and create a lantern instead. I would still feel great about myself and move on. But what if I was trying to 100% accurately recreate a scene of another game or movie and the scene had a candle in it? Well, you better be sure that I would try my hardest to create that candle, and maybe I would even succeed in the end. So because I tried to recreate the cyberpunk scene to the best of my ability, I learned a lot of things along the way. This brings me to the subject of this video. Lighting. Because I really believe that recreating the cyberpunk apartment gave me a new perspective on how important lighting is in a scene. Without it, scenes just feel boring. But what I found that's even more important than lighting is shading. Lights may give life to your scene, but shadow gives it depth and grounds it. Here though is where I found one of the biggest limitations of Dreams so far. That is that there's only one kind of light that actually creates shadows, and that's the spotlight. So if you just make an object emit light or use a 360 degrees point light, the light won't actually be blocked by walls or objects in the scene, which can create a lot of issues and weird looking bright areas. This means that you'll essentially have to fake most of the lighting in your level by slamming invisible spotlights everywhere with the highest radius possible. Maybe this approach will change in the future once someone finds a way to do it better, or maybe someone has already found a better way, but this is how I created most of the lighting in the cyberpunk scene. There's some fun to this though, slowly assembling your lighting until your scene looks just as if all the light is natural. It's a fun feeling, knowing that most people will not even think about all the cheating you're doing. In the scene I created, the first place where I really went all out with this is the gun room in the apartment. At this point I had more or less completely modeled the room and I had just finished the lamps on the ceiling. The room felt really boring though, compared to the room of the gameplay demo I was recreating. It was immediately obvious that the lack of shading was causing this. To fix it, I used the earlier mentioned method of placing spotlights everywhere. I found that scenes like this with lamps stuck to walls often look more natural if instead of trying to mimic the desired lighting by placing these spotlights inside or as close as possible to the lamps in the scene, you place the spotlights on the opposite side of the lamp so you can simultaneously light the floor, the wall beneath the lamp and maybe even the walls at the sides at the same time. Still, it took 6 lamps for the gun room alone, which is not a good thing. The reason why using the least amount of lights as possible is preferred is first of all because shadows will start overlapping and start looking wrong. If you look under the desk for example, all kind of weirdness is going on because of the amount of lights in the scene. I just couldn't get rid of any lights though, so I found a way around this problem. If you create an object and set cast shadows to always, then make the object invisible, a shadow is cast even though you can't see the object. So I made an object with the shape of the shadow I wanted beneath the desk and made it clip through the ground and wall. This way no light can pass and the illusion of a shadow is created. The same thing was done at another desk in the scene. But a second reason why less shadow casters is preferred is because Dreams can handle only so many shadows at the same time before it starts affecting performance. After placing like 10 shadow casting spotlights, Dreams will automatically start turning off the ability to cast shadows for some of them for this exact reason. You can also do that manually, by the way, if a certain light doesn't need that ability in the first place. But to optimize the lights, you may want to use trigger zones to turn the cast shadows on or off for certain lights. In the Cyberpunk scene, for example, I use a trigger zone next to the window to turn the shadows on for the lights outside, but turn the shadows off for some of the lights in the gun room. Keep in mind that you will still want to keep that ability on for lights aimed at walls, or the light will go through them. But for the other lights, you can't see the switching happening because you can't see into the gun room from the living room. You could maybe also use a laser scope attached to the player to activate shadows only when you look in the direction of the shadow. But another small trick I used in this scene had to do with the sun. You can see in the gameplay that the sunlight from outside is really quite bright and it casts a really well-defined shadow. And this is generally overlooked or not really thought about by people, but the sun in real life is damn bright, so the in-game equivalent should be as well. Unfortunately, if you use the sky gadget, changing the brightness of the sun or sky also mingles with the lighting inside an enclosed environment, like the room. So setting it to its highest brightness will make the indoor area look bright as well. I think it's better for a room to be quite dark in Dreams, because the earlier mentioned lack of shadows will make the room feel kinda lifeless. Since changing the sky wasn't an option, I once again used a spotlight and aimed it at the window. This brought up an interesting issue though. When light comes from a single point, the shadows it casts have really wide angles that differ from both sides of the object. Most of the time you will surely want this, but not for the sun. Because yes, the sun is kind of a point light, but it's also a point light that's a distance of 150 billion kilometers away. Once your light is that far away, the shadows from the left side of an object will seem completely parallel with the shadow of the right side. And to mimic this behavior, I came up with the genius idea to use 2 spotlights instead of 1. One for the shadow on the left, and the other for the right. It was a really annoying process to line them up exactly so all the detail in the shadow was consistent, but once it was done, it created a really nice effect. In the end, the lights didn't even completely cover the blinders, but the gap in lighting is almost impossible to notice from the inside. Also, little side note, Dreams actually has some really nice volumetric smoke. If you stand still in the right place, you can actually see the rays of sunlight breaking up the smoke that was placed beneath the window. I think you can make some pretty cool God ray effects with this. But okay, right now we have some sunlight, a cool looking gun room with good shadows, and a bathroom and a second desk that utilize some of the same tricks. Still, the living room feels a bit lifeless. This time though, we can't use any lights to create shadow because, well, there are no light sources in the main room, or at least they're not activated during the daytime, which is understandable. The problem here is a lack of ambient occlusion. Ambient occlusion is something that you can find in pretty much every game, and it's really what can make a scene feel grounded. Ambient occlusion is basically the addition of shadows at places where 2 objects meet. So if you have a staircase, for example, it will have a bit of shadow in all the corners, so the whole thing won't seem uniformly lit. Also, when things are close to walls, for example, there should be a shadow between them. Dreams does seem to have ambient occlusion, but only sometimes and not always as pronounced as you might want. The result is that a lot of objects will feel like they're just floating on top of a surface instead of standing on it. The solution? Painting the shadows yourself. No, I'm not kidding. You can paint these shadows in yourself by picking a really dark color and then setting the luceness quite high, so it blends really well. After that, just add ambient occlusion wherever needed. I might have gone a bit overboard myself, as you can see with this cup and these bottles, but the difference with and without is pretty major. Whereas one point the cup looks like it's not even on the surface, the next moment it feels completely part of the environment. Keep in mind though that if you think you might do this at some point in your scene, it's best to future-proof every object you expect to be affected by ambient occlusion by painting it while in sculpt mode instead of using the tint tool. By tinting your object a certain color, you lose the ability to paint details on it. Of course you can remove the tint afterwards if you change your mind about an object afterwards, but this is really annoying to do if you need to do this like 10 objects in a row. Speaking from experience. This was done in a lot of places in the Cyberpunk scene. A few noteworthy examples are the couch where ambient occlusion was added beneath it, and especially the closets, which are almost unrecognizable after darkening it and the individual shelves. A lot of the objects on the shelves were also darkened a lot to make it seem like they're in the shadow. Ambient Occlusion was also added to some objects that are touching the ground in the gun room. In the end, I did not add Ambient Occlusion to the corners where the walls hit the ceiling, simply because it was really hard to keep this transparency and size consistent. On top of that, enough of the time has been spent already making this scene, and at some point you just have to stop. That's by the way why some key details from the real Cyberpunk 2077 gameplay demo were left out. Not because they're impossible to make, but because you just have to stop at some point. But that was more or less all I had to say. I don't currently know if I'm going to upload a lot of Dreams content, because even though I'm super passionate about the game, I just don't feel like I'm experienced enough right now to have an interesting say in anything. But I still might do a video on certain aspects in Dreams every once in a while. I'm probably also going to continue to make some videos about gaming topics I'm passionate about, but becoming a quote-unquote real YouTuber is not a long-term goal for me, at least not right now. As a direct result, this will not be a channel with consistent content, but rather one where I upload with something whenever I feel like I have something interesting to say. So if you are subscribed to this channel right now, feel free to unsubscribe or resubscribe whenever you want, because I'm just here to have fun and I hope you're as well. With that said, I thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you around.